Great. As promised, we are delighted to be joined to my immediate left, Dr. Becky Telford, who is the chief of the High Commissioner for Refugees Education section. And next to her is Adriana Figueredo Costero, a global advocate for education and a youth advocate for refugees and girls' education. They're here to talk to you about UNHCR's education report. Please.
Thank you so much. So we're happy to be here to talk about the education report. It comes out annually, and UNHCR shares the data around education for refugees, as well as some of the core messages. And I think perhaps the overarching core message is one that doesn't change. That's that access to quality education really isn't a luxury. It's a human right, and it's something that should be available to all young refugees from the start of an emergency. Having said that it's not maybe the newest message, I think it's critical to talk about it now for two main reasons. The first of these is around looking at the number of refugees globally, which continues to grow. This reached more than 21.3 million in 2021. But of those refugees, access to education remains very limited, including compared to host populations. Just 42% of refugee children are enrolled globally in pre-primary, 68% in primary, which then goes down significantly to 37% in secondary. There has been an increase to 6% in tertiary, but the numbers are and remain relatively low. And with the increase in refugee and displaced populations, it is increasingly urgent that those gaps are addressed. I think it's good to remember that there is some progress. There's a huge amount of work and support being done on these issues. And that tertiary education number has gone up over the last number of years from 1% to 3%, and then this year to 6%. And that represents not just an increase in the number of young refugees who are able to access post-secondary education to give back to their communities, but also the work done with national governments and with others to increase that. We continue to call urgently for all refugee youth and children to have access to quality education right through the life cycle. And the focus here continues to be the inclusion in national education systems. So in the systems of the governments and the countries where they then reside once they become refugees. That does need relevant education financing mechanisms. There's been a huge amount of support put in from host governments, but actually meeting that support with financing is increasingly critical. We need more decisive collective action to ensure that all refugees are included in ways that recognise and meet their very specific needs. The other reason that we come back to that core message is that now is a critical time to remember it. As we're going into the Transforming Education Summit, as global leaders are coming together here in New York next week, it's vital that that transformation agenda meaningfully includes refugees and their needs, including around financing and around the recognition of specific additional activities and interventions to support refugees. As the report says from our High Commissioner, talent is universal and opportunity is not. But listening to the voices of refugees and understanding what lack of opportunity means at an individual, family and community level is incredibly important. We will have 4 young refugees at the Transforming Education Summit, and ensuring that their voices are heard and that their voices and needs are then recognised and represented in the conclusions and commitments that come from that summit is the only way that we're going to continue to make progress. I'm also very happy that one of those 4 young refugees is here to talk about the fact that, we can put the report together, we can share some of the data, we can share some of those stories, because the data is not the most important point. The impact on individual lives, on their families, communities and futures is what matters most. So I'm going to turn to Adriana to talk a bit about her own experience.
Thank you so much, Becky. My name is Adriana Figueredo. I'm a refugee living in Mexico. I had the opportunity to be a Duffy Scholar and to achieve my bachelor's degree in international relations. But I know from my perspective that I was coming to a new country with a whole of opportunities that were not necessarily reachable to me at the time. Even before Duffy, I knew that I wasn't able to continue my career. I was about to quit. And I know that without DAFI, I wouldn't have been able to finish my education, nor have the opportunities I have right now as trained professional. Also, I know that I was lucky because I know that only the 6% of refugee students are getting access to tertiary education right now. And these are hopes and dreams we are talking about. As refugees, we are facing barriers every single day. When it comes to education, it's clear just now how far we have to go to reach the opportunities that everyone else is getting. Not just to attend university, but also to have access to primary and secondary education. Before COVID, we were facing a lot of barriers like lack of enrollment, crowded classes with stress and not effective teaching, not having the access to the proper documentation we need to access education. But now think about the digital world that started with COVID and lockdowns. As refugees, in most of the cases, we don't have access to internet or electricity, nor proper training to use this new digital infrastructure in order to learn, which is adding extra barriers to us. And this is just an example about the barriers we have to face as refugees every single day when it comes to education. But on the other hand, no one chooses to be a refugee. And when you become one, your life will change forever. Your future and dreams will not even be a thought in your mind because you will be thinking about survives. But when you get to your new shelter, to your new place, you will have a dream. And it will be the dream to have a new opportunity, to open the door to new opportunities for you and your family. And this wouldn't be possible without education. And as refugees, sometimes we don't know if we are coming back home soon or if we are coming back home at all. But we know that we need to continue studying because education is the tool that will open us the opportunities in an unknown world. And we don't want anyone's future to be put on hold just because we are starting fresh. This is why it's important to all of us as refugees to be part of the international and national programs and initiatives to be enrolled in education at all levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary education, taking our possible difficulties in consideration and talking or trying to reach out equity instead of equality. Finally, as the report mentioned, as Becky mentioned before, talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And it's irresponsible as decision makers to change that, to open the doors to education to people who have been left behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. First question will go to the President of the UN Correspondents Association.
Thank you, Stefan. On behalf of Vanca, thank you so much for this briefing. So my question is on Ukraine. Have you seen a better picture in the last few months comparing to from the first months of the war, of course, in terms of education and the refugees in the neighboring countries? Thank you so much.
Yes, so obviously the scale and the pace of the flight from Ukraine meant that there were, thousands and thousands of children in neighbouring countries, and work was put into place immediately to support them. First of all, getting basic services, psychosocial support, and then also working with host governments to look at how to include them into the national system. As we're coming to the start of the new school year, with September, there has definitely been movement in terms of the number of children allocated places, and also funding around having additional teacher support. Lots of countries have been able to either recognise qualifications of Ukrainian teachers or to be able to support them as learning assistants and classroom assistants as children are moving in. So there's definitely been movement there.
Thank you. Ibtisam?
Thank you. Asim Asim from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. Just a quick follow-up first. So you talked about financial needs. Do you have numbers, how much you need? And then beside financial support, what is one of your major challenges you're facing? And then I have a quick question, or not quick, about Arab countries and refugees from Arab countries. If you could point out to the challenges, I know that it's different from one country to another, but if you could give us examples of challenging they are facing in the different communities they are staying in. Thank you.
Thanks. The broad amount in terms of financing, and this is financing for the inclusion of refugees into national systems, right? So it's supporting within those host governments, is 4.85 billion a year. And that was a study by UNHCR and the World Bank, and it's referenced in the report. In terms of major challenges, financing is one. I think as well as that broad picture in terms of financing for inclusion and having the mechanisms that work effectively, there's also putting in place money for wraparound support, so things like language training, mental health and psychosocial support, and also assisting refugees where maybe they don't have the right to work, for example, to be able to pay for costs that would normally be borne by households, so costs of uniform or transport, and making sure that there's things into place for that. For Arab countries, like you say, there's lots of different challenges in the different ones, and I think there's some kind of very effective solutions which are working well. I mean, Egypt obviously has a number of refugees from different countries, including Arabic speaking. They have worked towards including those refugees into national schools. They have some very kind of forward-leaning policies around, you talked about digital and connected education, and they've been able to try and work to include refugees in those. A country like Lebanon, where there are significant socioeconomic challenges going on for the whole population, and an increased move of Lebanese children from private school into public school. Sometimes the challenges there are just around having a very rapid response to prevent overcrowding, to make sure there are more teachers, or that teachers are properly paid and supported, and within an existing and challenged system that can be difficult.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Natalie Liutenko, ICTV station, Ukraine. And back to the Ukrainian situation, especially to those that under the Russian occupiers. I'm worried, do the UN have any access to the schools there? Because it's known that Russian occupiers took every Ukrainian literature there. They get rid of any, they're not allowing Ukrainian kids to go online and to study with Ukrainian teachers to the rest of the territory of Ukraine. And do you have any access, or maybe are you working on that to help Ukrainian kids there? Thank you.
So I'm going to say that I don't have that information at this point, and we can come back to you. UNHCR, from the education perspective, is looking at supporting children once they become refugees and they're in the neighbouring countries. So I would prefer that we come back to you on that one.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, Kuroshio Barry from Asia Times. So my question is, the Iranian authorities have been constantly complaining that the international sanctions against the country have prevented the government from being able to cater to the educational needs of the large population of Afghan refugees living in the country, including, nearly 2 million Afghans who are officially being documented as refugees living in the country, and so many of them are going to schools or universities. Do you believe that these complaints are legitimate, and do you believe that the UNHCR is able in any way to contribute to the improvement of the educational standards of Afghan students living in Iran?
Thank you. I think the first point on the sanctions is something that I can't answer as the chief of the education section. We're very focused on the kind of delivery implementation of education, and as the focus of that question is again something we're going to have to come back to you on. UNHCR does work to support the kind of delivery of education in Iran, and for Afghan refugees in neighbouring countries where appropriate. And so we're able to put in place both advocacy and policy work in terms of inclusion into national systems, support around putting in place financing, including for those wraparound or additional costs, so where we talked about language, MHPSS. There are also aspects of supporting, where appropriate, host governments on looking at ensuring that their data systems are working, that they have a really good view of who needs what and how that links to kind of national policy.
Thank you. Any more questions? Great. I'd like to thank our guest.